Hey.
So I'm not going to do poems for you tonight, because I've spent a great deal of this year since I moved here this year. Since I moved here in May last year from Ireland, I've spent a great deal of time writing essays about immigration and what it means to be a person who has relocated themselves from one culture to another. And I'm going to read you a true story about a cat. I adopted a cat when I moved here, and he ruined my life. And this print is from an email I sent to a friend of mine saying, I think this thing is missing a heart or a point or something, but I still feel like it's a story I need to tell. When his body moved back under the covers, I started to wake up properly, having been in the strange, half-asleep sleep space I taught myself how to slip into when, months before, the cat had started to commence life-ruining in the hours before dawn. CB was sniffling, his body colder despite the enormous blue bathrobe he'd acquired at some point between our room and the kitchen. I hate talking. In the first hours that I spend awake, my mouth fuzzy and jaw possibly arthritic or lazy-jawed, each morning between 4 and 7 when the cat's slow, deliberate dismantling of our bedroom begins. I usually just mumble some tender thanks to CB when he, the soft touch, gives in to Moriarty, shitebag Casablanca. Casablanca because he's black and white. Gives in to Moriarty first and rises to feed him. That morning was during the phase where Moriarty had discovered the noise that our plastic, colourless, came-with-the-apartment blinds made. We don't have a window or a balcony in our bedroom, just a strange set of ancient glass double doors and a steel grille leading out onto a fire escape. The blinds look as though they belong in a clinic or a classroom from my childhood in the ashy grey of 1990s Ireland. That is to say, they are so ugly that they cannot be disguised. They make a clacking noise when they move. They make a louder, more disturbing clacking noise when they are the target of a small, airborne feline's assault. This noise makes me think of bones being snapped. Many bones, all at once. It is a spine played like a tuneless xylophone. It is the warning rumble of an earthquake, clack, 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 all foreboding and plastic. It usually comes between 3 and 6 a.m. I have learned how to tune it out. One morning it rained and I focused so hard on the hush of the rain that the murder clack just faded into nothing. CB has not mastered ignoring it. It gets inside his skin and he cannot rest until it stops. He faithfully, time and time again, rises to feed the creature, then returns sadly to bed, sleep broken, day begun far too early. I leant into him tenderly this morning, but he did not lie down to meet me. He was sitting upright, leaning forward. This alarmed me. I sat up to see what was wrong, still sleep delirious. His hand was clenched to his nose, bunched with tissues. Do you have a nosebleed? Yes. Are you okay? Yes. Did the cat give you a nosebleed? I don't know. I don't think so. When was the last time you had one? I don't know. I think the cat gave you a nosebleed. Nosebleeds freak me out because I've never had one in my whole entire life. They make me think of the X-Files and people having sudden violent brain hemorrhages. And alien capsules being implanted into the skin of your neck. I remember children having them in the playground and holding their head back, nostrils crammed with toilet paper so that the blood rolled back into their system like nothing ever happened. I wonder where they are now. If they ever suffered repercussions as adults from all the runaway blood they drained back into their airway. As CB sat there in the morning that came too early, head tilted forward, I was angrier at the cat than I had ever been. My partner was bleeding out of his face because of this creature. The man who had agreed, only a week before, to spend the rest of his life with me was bleeding out of his face because of the cat. The cat entered our lives in the summer, shortly after I first stepped onto Cesar Chavez with 48 kilos of my life in 2 cheap suitcases, jet-lagged and terrified. I had not expected the cold plateau of unemployment to follow me to America from home, and was finding it extremely difficult to connect with people. As a result, while CB was in work miles away in Silicon Valley, I often spent days just walking, trying to understand the language of San Francisco, hoping that if I put in enough footsteps, it would suddenly talk back to me. We live in the borderlands of the Mission, and every day I would wander a little further down into the grid of the neighborhood, picking up things in thrift stores to place in our hollow little flat that might make it look like home. I hated being there. This empty house was not what emigration was supposed to look like. So I walked. This mapless wandering eventually took me to a huge set of buildings near a freeway bridge. SFSPCA is a lot of letters, but I knew one of them stood for animals, and I'm not sure what I was thinking, wandering in, saying, I was in the mind of adopting a kitten, did they have any? I have never owned, full disclosure, I have never owned a domestic animal in my life. 3 kittens had orbited me throughout my adult life at various distances. Cammy, a college boyfriend's Norwegian forest cat with no eyelids. Lola, an old friend's pink-bellied tabby. Jaws, my former housemate's toothless black and white rescue. All made weird noises and were very small until they weren't, and were absent as soon as they grew out of this cuteness and became old enough to prowl suburban landscapes for baby birds to torture. I wasn't thinking that far ahead as I wandered through the strange corridors full of snoozing, mewling balls of fur. When I would hint to my father, when I was a little girl, that kittens were a lot of fun and a great idea, he would regale me with stories of the dead cats of his childhood, white baby ones found beneath packing cases in the garden, bags of them drowned in the Clonmel River, Mama and Fatso who lived and lived and lived and bred and bred and bred. Kittens turn into cats. Cats won't love you like you love them. Visiting the small creatures of the SFSPCA became a thing I did sometimes. I turned the idea over and over that this would be the thing that would plant me some roots in America. Maybe it would turn me into an adult. Or, at very least, bring some reality into the barren, overpriced new home I found myself in. A thing with fur and lungs and eyes that needs to be fed and taken care of would bring normality, wouldn't it? People in the world swear they love their animals like brothers and sisters, don't they? I entertained the notion of just showing up at the door of our flat with a kitten under my arm, but I realised I had to have a conversation with CB before springing a life on him. I knew this because for our 3-month anniversary I decided it would be very romantic to bring him a goldfish. CB, having majored in philosophy in his undergrad, was not in the least bit impressed with this. A tiny life in a plastic bag was not a present. I maintained that it was not a tiny life, it was basically a plant with eyeballs. A fish. A fucking fish. Unnamed. Lived for almost half a year. More than most of that half of a year, it lived in a saucepan full of tap water. in an apartment at St. Patrick's Cathedral. I'd like to think it lived a happy little life, floating in the blackness of the saucepan, almost a bit like drifting in space. In retrospect, maybe we should have called it astronaut instead of nothing. To avoid another saucepan situation, I said to CB, I figured a cat would ground us, put down some roots, stop us running from America at the first sign of trouble. Plus, kittens were adorable and possibly internet lucrative. We could be millionaires. CB, think about it. It's a business investment. Whatever way that conversation went, through the inevitable, is this a practice baby? Through the, it's going to live for ever, you know that, right? Sequence, and finished at the, let's do this, it could be hilarious. I was very proud when I eventually returned to the SFSBCA with another person on my arm, because I'm sure the staff were a little wary of the regular sad girl with weird accent wandering around the kennels. Moriarty, then named Muffin, was in a puddle of his brothers in a kitty condo with a television screen that played a loop of a flickering image of a forest bird on a branch. He had the longest hair of all of his siblings, was patched black and white like a tiny cow, and looked like a reject puppet from the Henson workshop, possibly around the Labyrinth/Dark Crystal era. I picked him up, and his fingertip-sized paw went straight for the emerald necklace I wore on my neck. Love at first looting. This little creep was coming home with us. CB quickly revealed himself to be a kitten whisperer. The small thing would stand on his shoulder like a demented parrot on some sort of glasses-wearing hipster skinny jean pirate. The kitten and I would lie in bed in the mornings when I scanned aimlessly through Craigslist writing/editing job listings. He was so small that he could lie on my sternum, purring like a handheld thunderstorm. He was poorly coordinated, but had the ambition of a mountain climber. He slowly became characterized as a mildly insane, hyper-violent, evil mastermind, as per his name. The most exciting thing about him, the most exciting thing about making him part of our lives was inventing a history for him, projecting a million stories onto him. He became a weird little catalyst, I'm aware this is a pun, I'm just going to leave it right there, for more sessions of hysterical laughter and elaborate fictional narratives than I ever expected. And yet, there he was that morning, sitting on the edge of our bed as CB bled out of his face. I was so angry, so enraged at that moment by how we hadn't had a full night's sleep since Moriarty came into our lives, so utterly and totally freaked out by the fact that my partner was bleeding out of his face. I held him very tightly as Moriarty continued to ricochet himself around the bedroom as he usually does at dawn, until we eventually passed into an uneasy last few hours of rest before we had to get up and be people, an intern, and an internet detective. When I woke up properly later in the morning, CB, having departed for Silicon Valley long before, the black and white creature was snoozing in a little ball beside me. I thought about the day ahead of me again, the strangeness of Americans and their television voices, how it was all still so hard to connect to them. I scratched Moriarty under his chin. He purred, eyes blinking, all interstellar yellow. A life ruiner, sure, a holy terror, but absolutely a real honest thing when California seemed anything but.